The acrid, unmistakable odor of freshly mixed cement, sharp and alien, in the usually familiar hallway of the Pleasant Valley condominiums, was the first thing that struck Mike Johnson as he approached his mother's third-floor unit. It was a smell that in his line of work often heralded trouble. Unpermitted modifications deliberately blocked drains, or worse. He quickened his pace, a knot of unease tightening in his chest. He was here for his regular Tuesday evening visit with his mother Clara, a woman of 78 years, whose gentle spirit and increasing frailty were his constant concern. As he rounded the final corner, the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. His mother's front door was ajar, and Clara was standing just inside her small, stooped frame, trembling, her face ashen with a mixture of terror and disbelief. She was pointing a shaking finger not at her front door, but at the door to her only bathroom, a few feet down the short internal hallway of her small apartment. That door, the one leading to the most essential of facilities, was completely, utterly, and inexplicably sealed shut, with a thick, crudely applied layer of still damp gray cement. "Mike. Oh, Michael, thank God you're here." Clara's voice was a thin, reedy whisper laced with panic. I can't get in. It's blocked solid." Mike was beside her in an instant, his professional instincts overriding his initial shock. He reached out and touched the rough, uneven surface that had until very recently been his mother's bathroom door. The cement was indeed fresh, already beginning to harden, but still slightly yielding to pressure. It had been slathered on, thickly sealing the door tightly within its frame, effectively creating an impenetrable barrier, a crude, almost violent act of imprisonment from the most private of spaces. "Who did this, Mom?" Mike asked, his voice dangerously calm, though a storm of fury was gathering within him. "Did you see anyone, hear anything?" Clara shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, dear. I was in the living room listening to my radio program. I went to use the facilities just before you arrived, and I found this. It must have happened very recently. The smell, I only just noticed it." She clutched his arm, her small hand surprisingly strong. "What am I going to do, Michael? It's my only bathroom." The implications of that simple statement were dire. Clara lived with several age-related health conditions, including diabetes and a mild kidney insufficiency, which necessitated frequent and predictable access to a bathroom. Being denied that access was not just an inconvenience, it was a serious, immediate threat to her health and well-being. His gaze fell upon a faint, almost invisible smear of gray cement on the hallway carpet just outside his mother's unit door near the jamb, as if someone had hastily wiped a trowel or a hand. And then he noticed another more telling sign, the distinct, albeit faint, lingering scent of Ms. Agnes Periwinkle's cloyingly strong, rose-scented air freshener, a smell she used obsessively in the common hallways, particularly Mike recalled, with a sudden, chilling clarity whenever she had complained in the past about unpleasant odors emanating from other units. Ms. Periwinkle, the self-appointed enforcer of all things pure and proper in Pleasant Valley condominiums, and the tyrannical president of their HOA. Mike Johnson was not just a devoted son. He was a senior investigator for the city's Emergency Plumbing and Sanitary Code Enforcement Division. His job involved dealing with everything from illegal sewer connections and major blockages threatening public health to situations where landlords deliberately or negligently deprived tenants of essential plumbing services. He knew building codes, health regulations, and the legal ramifications of tampering with essential facilities inside and out. He also knew how to investigate and build a case against those who violated them. Ms. Periwinkle, whose path he had crossed on several occasions due to her endless, often baseless complaints about other residents' plumbing or cooking smells, knew him only as Clara Johnson's son, the quiet man who visits on Tuesdays. She had no idea of his profession, nor of the specific set of skills and legal authorities he possessed. And she had, it appeared, just committed an act of such outrageous, malicious endangerment that it defied all rational explanation. Clara had lived in her small one-bedroom unit in Pleasant Valley condominiums for the past 15 years, since her husband Mike's father had passed away. It was a modest but comfortable space, and she had cherished her independence there. The HOA, however, under the increasingly autocratic leadership of Ms. Agnes Periwinkle, a woman whose tenure as president had begun 5 years prior and had been marked by a steady escalation of petty rules and intrusive oversight, had become a growing source of anxiety for many of the older residents including Clara. Ms. Periwinkle, a woman whose own apartment was rumored to be a hermetically sealed shrine to antibacterial cleansers and industrial-strength air neutralizers, had a particular, almost pathological obsession with perceived odors. She had issued formal warnings to residents for excessive cooking smells, for using unapproved scented laundry detergents, and even in one notorious instance for the olfactory nuisance caused by a resident's therapeutic lavender sachets. Clara, with her simple home cooking and her occasional use of a mild rose-scented talcum powder, had recently become the target of several of Ms. Periwinkle's thinly veiled complaints, delivered via passive-aggressive notes, slipped under her door, or pointed remarks made in the hallway about certain lingering unpleasant aromas that were allegedly impacting the shared air quality of the floor. Clara had been deeply distressed by these accusations, though she couldn't imagine what unpleasant aromas Miss Periwinkle was referring to beyond the normal, gentle sense of a quiet life. Now this was not a note, not a pointed remark. This was a physical act of aggression, a deliberate, malicious sealing of an essential facility, an act that was not only cruel, but profoundly dangerous. Mike's immediate priority was his mother's well-being. The cement was still relatively fresh, but hardening rapidly. He knew he had to act quickly. "Mom," he said, his voice firm but reassuring, "I need you to stay in the living room for a few minutes. I'm going to get you into your bathroom. Don't worry, I'll handle this." He retrieved a heavy-duty pry bar and a small sledgehammer from the emergency toolkit he always kept in his car, tools of his trade usually employed for accessing blocked pipes or investigating illegal modifications. Returning to his mother's unit, he first examined the cemented door more closely. It was a standard hollow-core interior door, but the cement had been applied thickly around all four edges, effectively gluing it shut within the frame. There was no way to simply force it open without risking further damage or injury. He would have to break through. "Stand back, Mom," he instructed, positioning himself carefully. With a few well-aimed, powerful blows from the sledgehammer near the doorknob area, the cheap wood splintered, and the still pliable cement cracked and crumbled. He then used the pry bar to wrench the damaged section of the door inwards, creating a jagged makeshift opening just large enough for his mother to pass through. The air that wafted out from the now accessible bathroom was cool and faintly scented with his mother's familiar soap. Nothing remotely noxious or offensive. The only offensive odor was the lingering chemical reek of fresh cement in the hallway. The inciting incident, the heinous act of cementing Clara's bathroom door shut, had clearly been perpetrated by someone with a motive, the means, and a profound disregard for human decency. All evidence, both circumstantial and olfactory, pointed directly at Ms. Agnes Periwinkle. Her obsession with odors, her previous complaints targeting Clara, and the lingering scent of her signature air freshener near the scene created a compelling, if not yet legally proven, hypothesis. The sheer audacity of the act, its calculated cruelty, spoke of a mind unhinged by its own petty power, a mind that believed itself to be above any form of accountability. The first shocking escalation in this bizarre and dangerous drama unfolded almost immediately after Mike had managed to create an opening into his mother's bathroom. He had just helped Clara inside and was beginning to assess the damage to the door and frame when Ms. Periwinkle herself appeared in Clara's open front doorway, her arms crossed her face, a mask of righteous indignation. "Well, well, Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice dripping with accusation, completely ignoring Clara's visible distress and the jagged hole where her bathroom door had been. "I see you're engaging in unauthorized and destructive alterations to HOA property, breaking down doors indeed. This is a clear violation of bylaw. 23 subsection D regarding damage to fixtures and common elements. There will be significant fines for this, I assure you. And what is that appalling smell of dust and destruction?" Mike stared at her, momentarily speechless, at her sheer gall. "Ms. Periwinkle," he said, his voice dangerously low, "are you seriously complaining about my actions after someone, and I have a very strong suspicion. I know who cemented my elderly mother's only bathroom door shut, trapping her from essential facilities and creating a serious health hazard." Ms. Periwinkle sniffed disdainfully. "Trapping her? Don't be so melodramatic. I know nothing about any cement. Perhaps your mother had a small DIY project that went awry. Some people are not suited to home repairs. However, she continued, her eyes narrowing. "I have received numerous, and I mean numerous, complaints from other residents on this floor about persistent offensive odors emanating from this particular unit. Odors that are, quite frankly, a serious violation of our community's hygiene and olfactory standards, as outlined in Bylaw 12, subsection A. Perhaps this incident, whatever its cause, will serve as a catalyst for your mother to finally address the underlying sanitation issues that are so clearly plaguing her apartment and, by extension, this entire floor. The unmitigated cruelty, the blatant gaslighting, the immediate shift to blaming the victim. It was breathtaking. Ms. Periwinkle was not only denying her actions, but was attempting to frame Clara as the perpetrator of a nuisance so severe that it somehow justified, or at least explained, such an extreme response. She then had the audacity to pull out a small notepad and pen. "I will, of course, be documenting the damage you have caused Mr. Johnson for the board's immediate review, and I trust the source of the noxious effluvia from this unit will be dealt with post-haste." With a final contemptuous glare, she turned and swept out of the apartment, leaving Mike and Clara in stunned, furious silence. The second shocking incident demonstrating the HOA board's utter failure or complicity occurred the very next day. Mike, after ensuring his mother was safe and had temporary, albeit undignified, access to her bathroom through the shattered door, immediately drafted a formal detailed complaint to the Pleasant Valley Condominium's HOA Board of Directors. He outlined the criminal act of sabotage, the clear endangerment of his mother, his strong suspicions regarding Ms. Periwinkle's involvement, citing her previous harassment and the circumstantial evidence, and demanded an immediate investigation and appropriate action. He also included photographs of the cemented door and the damage he had been forced to inflict to gain access. The response, when it came 2 days later via a curt, unsigned email from a generic HOA board address, was as shocking as it was infuriating. It stated in brief bureaucratic prose that, after a preliminary review of the situation and a discussion with the HOA president, Ms. Periwinkle, the board had determined that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate Mr. Johnson's allegations of malicious intent. It went on to say that Ms. Periwinkle had assured the board that she was merely attempting to address a long-standing and well-documented issue of persistent noxious odors emanating from Unit 3B, which constituted a serious breach of community bylaws and had generated numerous complaints from other residents. The email concluded by stating that the board considered the matter an unfortunate but isolated incident arising from a misunderstanding of appropriate remedial actions, and that they would be issuing a formal warning to Mrs. Clara Johnson regarding the hygiene standards of her unit. Furthermore, they upheld Ms. Periwinkle's assessment of fines against Mike for unauthorized destruction of HOA property, the bathroom door. Mike read the email 3 times, his disbelief curdling into a cold, hard rage. The HOA board was not just inept. They were actively colluding with Ms. Periwinkle, whitewashing her criminal actions, and victim-blaming his elderly mother. They were enabling a dangerous, unhinged individual who clearly believed she could act with impunity. It was then that Mike knew he could no longer approach this as merely a concerned son dealing with a problematic HOA. Mrs. Periwinkle had crossed a line into criminal territory, and the HOA board had made themselves accessories after the fact. It was time for investigator Mike Johnson of the Emergency Plumbing and Sanitary Code Enforcement Division to take official action. The midpoint of this escalating crisis arrived as Mike, his professional resolve now fully engaged, began to build a formal official case against Ms. Agnes Periwinkle, and by extension, the negligent and complicit Pleasant Valley HOA board. He knew that his mother's safety, and potentially the safety of other vulnerable residents, depended on his ability to meticulously document Ms. Periwinkle's outrageous actions and the clear violations of law and code that had occurred. His first step was to conduct a thorough site investigation of his mother's apartment in his official capacity, something he now had clear justification to do, given the deliberate obstruction of essential sanitary facilities and the potential health hazards created. He carefully collected samples of the cement used to seal the door, noting its specific type and consistency. He photographed the damage to the door and frame documenting the force required to breach the barrier. He took sworn detailed statements from his mother about the incident and about Ms. Periwinkle's prior pattern of harassment regarding alleged odors. He also discreetly interviewed other residents on his mother's floor, inquiring if they had seen or heard anything unusual on the evening of the incident, or if they too had been subjected to Ms. Periwinkle's olfactory-obsessed tyranny. Several, though initially fearful of retribution, privately admitted to having received similar unwarranted complaints from Ms. Periwinkle about cooking smells or cleaning products, though none had experienced anything as extreme as Clara's ordeal. The significant twist, the discovery that broadened the scope of Ms. Periwinkle's malfeasance beyond a personal vendetta against his mother, came when Mike, using his access to city, permitting and procurement databases, decided to investigate the source of the cement. He cross-referenced recent orders for cement and masonry supplies within the Pleasant Valley condominium's known vendor network. He found something intriguing, a recent, unusually large order for quick-setting Portland cement, placed not by an individual resident for a personal project, but by the Pleasant Valley HOA itself, signed off by Ms. Agnes Periwinkle and designated for urgent minor pathway and foundation repairs in common areas. However, when Mike conducted a physical inspection of all common area pathways and foundations within the complex, he could find no evidence whatsoever of any recent legitimate cement repair work having been undertaken. The quantity of cement ordered, however, would have been more than sufficient for Ms. Periwinkle's nefarious project on his mother's bathroom door, with plenty left over. This suggested not only premeditation, but also the potential misappropriation of HOA funds to procure materials for a criminal act. Furthermore, as he delved into past HOA meeting minutes and financial reports, many of which were poorly kept and deliberately opaque, a common tactic in mismanaged HOAs, he uncovered a disturbing pattern. Ms. Periwinkle had on several occasions over the past 2 years authorized emergency expenditures for odor remediation services and sanitary hazard abatement in common hallways, always vaguely attributed to unidentified sources. The costs for these services, paid to an obscure company called EnviroPure Solutions, were exorbitant. A little more digging revealed that EnviroPure Solutions was a barely registered one-person operation, whose mailing address led back to a private post office box, frequently used by Ms. Periwinkle's only living relative, a distant nephew, with a history of failed small businesses. It appeared Ms. Periwinkle was not only terrorizing residents over imagined smells, but was also potentially enriching herself and her family by fabricating crises and then billing the HOA for phantom solutions. Her obsession with odors was not just a personal idiosyncrasy, it was a pretext for a lucrative grift. The cementing of his mother's bathroom door was the desperate, unhinged act of a woman whose fraudulent schemes were perhaps beginning to unravel, or whose pathological need for control had simply reached a terrifying new extreme. Mike now had evidence of not just harassment and endangerment, but of potential large-scale fraud and embezzlement, all falling under the broad umbrella of creating and exploiting sanitary code emergencies, his direct professional jurisdiction. He began to compile his official report, a damning indictment of Ms. Periwinkle's reign of terror and corruption. He knew the upcoming emergency HOA meeting, which he himself had formally requested to address the catastrophic failure of the board to ensure resident safety and the integrity of essential facilities, would be the venue for Ms. Periwinkle's long overdue reckoning. The Pleasant Valley Condominium's community room, a usually drab space reserved for bingo nights and sparsely attended board meetings, was tonight packed to overflowing the air, thick with a palpable mixture of anger, anxiety, and a grim, expectant curiosity. The emergency HOA meeting, demanded by Mike Johnson in the wake of the shocking attack on his mother, and the board's initial dismissive response, had drawn nearly every resident out of their apartments. Agnes Periwinkle sat at the head table, flanked by the visibly uncomfortable and increasingly isolated members of her board, her expression a carefully constructed mask of aggrieved innocence and steely defiance. She clearly intended to portray herself as the victim of a malicious campaign orchestrated by Mr. Johnson, a disruptive outsider, intent on undermining her tireless efforts to maintain community standards. After a brief, stumbling opening statement from a board member attempting to downplay the unfortunate incident and appeal for calm and reasoned discussion, Ms. Periwinkle seized the floor. she launched into a lengthy, self-pitying tirade, accusing Mike Johnson of harassment, of property destruction, and of attempting to intimidate her and the board into ignoring Clara Johnson's long-standing and egregious violations of community hygiene bylaws. She painted herself as a martyr, a lone crusader, fighting for the olfactory purity and aesthetic integrity of Pleasant Valley. When she finally paused for breath, a dramatic sigh punctuating her performance, Mike Johnson rose slowly from his seat in the front row, a thick official-looking binder held firmly in his hands. A hush fell over the room. "Ms. Periwinkle." Mike began his voice, calm, measured, but resonating with an undeniable authority that cut through the charged atmosphere. "Your portrayal of events is, to put it mildly, a grotesque distortion of the truth. We are not here tonight to discuss my mother's entirely normal private life, nor your fabricated complaints about noxious odors. We are here to discuss your criminal actions on the evening of November 5th, when you deliberately and with malicious aforethought sealed shut the only bathroom door in my 78-year-old mother's apartment with quick-setting cement, thereby creating an immediate and severe medical hazard and effectively falsely imprisoning her from an essential life facility." A collective gasp swept through the room. Ms. Periwinkle leapt to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "That is a slanderous, outrageous lie. I did no such thing. You have no proof, only the ramblings of a senile old woman and your own vindictive imagination." "On the contrary, Ms. Periwinkle," Mike stated, his voice as cold and hard as the cement she had wielded, "I have a wealth of proof." He then proceeded with the meticulous precision of a seasoned investigator to lay bare his findings. He presented enlarged, dated photographs of the cemented door the damage caused and the tools required to breach it. He held up a sealed evidence bag containing samples of the specific Portland cement used and then produced copies of HOA procurement invoices signed by Ms. Periwinkle herself for an identical type and quantity of cement, ostensibly for common area repairs that were never performed. He detailed his interviews with other residents who had suffered her olfactory harassment. And then he delivered the financial bombshell outlining the inflated invoices and questionable payments made to Enviro Pure Solutions, her nephew's phantom company, for non-existent odor remediation services, effectively accusing her of systematic fraud and embezzlement of HOA funds under the guise of her hygiene crusade. With each revelation, Ms. Periwinkle's face grew paler, her denials weaker and more shrill, her composure visibly disintegrating before the horrified eyes of her fellow residents. "Most of you know me as Clara Johnson's son, Mike." He continued, his gaze sweeping the room before settling once more on the now trembling Ms. Periwinkle. "What you may not know is that my professional role is that of a senior investigator for the city's Emergency Plumbing and Sanitary Code Enforcement Division." He raised his official city-issued shield and identification card, the gold emblem glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the community room. "My responsibilities include investigating and prosecuting precisely these kinds of violations, the deliberate obstruction of essential sanitary facilities, the creation of public health hazards, the illegal and unpermitted alteration of plumbing and building structures, and the fraudulent misuse of funds designated for maintaining safe and habitable living conditions. Ms. Agnes Periwinkle, based on the comprehensive evidence I have gathered in my official capacity, I am hereby formally charging you with multiple serious offenses: aggravated elder abuse for knowingly endangering the health and safety of my mother, Clara Johnson, unlawful imprisonment for physically barring her from her essential facilities, malicious destruction of property, and multiple counts of felony fraud and embezzlement of homeowners association funds. My full investigative report, along with these charges and all supporting evidence, has already been transmitted to the City Attorney's Office and the Economic Crimes Division of the Police Department. Given the severity of these charges and the clear evidence of immediate danger posed by your actions, I have also requested and received authorization for your immediate removal from these premises, pending their full investigation." As he spoke, the final words, two uniformed city police officers whom Mike had arranged to be discreetly present at a nearby location entered the community room with quiet, professional authority. They moved purposefully towards the head table where Ms. Agnes Periwinkle sat, now utterly deflated, her face a mask of stunned disbelief and dawning abject terror. The reign of the odor-obsessed, cement-wielding tyrant of Pleasant Valley condominiums was over. The immediate aftermath of Ms. Agnes Periwinkle's public unmasking and subsequent escort from the premises by city police officers was one of stunned silence, quickly followed by an eruption of shocked exclamations, angry denunciations, and tearful expressions of relief from the residents of Pleasant Valley condominiums. As the full weight of Mike Johnson's revelations sank in, the calculated cruelty of cementing an elderly woman's bathroom door, the brazen financial fraud, the years of unchecked bullying under the guise of HOA authority. The community was thrown into a state of profound upheaval, but also, paradoxically, a state of emergent unified resolve. Clara Johnson, who had listened to her son's powerful professional indictment of her tormentor with a mixture of trepidation and quiet pride, was immediately surrounded by a comforting circle of neighbors, many of whom had previously been too intimidated by Ms. Periwinkle to offer overt support. Now they offered apologies for their silenced cups of tea and heartfelt assurances that she was, and always had been, a valued and respected member of their community. Mike, after a brief professional consultation with the arresting officers and the remaining shell-shocked HOA board members, turned his full attention to his mother, his relief at her immediate safety palpable. The damaged bathroom door, a stark symbol of Ms. Periwinkle's malice, was temporarily secured with arrangements made for its emergency replacement first thing in the morning, the cost of which the chastened HOA board instantly agreed to cover. In the days and weeks that followed, Pleasant Valley condominiums underwent a period of intense scrutiny and necessary transformation. The city attorney's office and the Economic Crimes Division launched comprehensive investigations into Ms. Periwinkle's actions, building upon the robust foundation of evidence Mike had provided. The HOA board, facing a tidal wave of resident anger and potential legal liabilities for their own negligence and complicity, dissolved with an interim management committee appointed by the city to oversee the association's affairs pending new fully transparent elections and a complete overhaul of its bylaws and financial practices. The phantom company, Enviro Pure Solutions, was quickly exposed as a fraudulent shell, and Ms. Periwinkle's nephew faced his own set of criminal charges. Ms. Agnes Periwinkle, stripped of her power, her reputation in ruins, and facing a battery of serious felony charges, found herself entangled in a legal nightmare of her own making. The evidence against her was overwhelming and undeniable. She was ultimately convicted on multiple counts, including elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and felony fraud. Her sentence was severe: a significant term of incarceration in a state correctional facility, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and treatment, substantial court-ordered restitution to the Pleasant Valley HOA for the embezzled funds, and to Clara Johnson for medical expenses related to the stress and aggravated health conditions caused by the ordeal and emotional distress. She was also permanently barred by court order from ever again holding any position of authority in any community association or fiduciary role, and a strict restraining order prevented her from any future contact with Clara Johnson or her family. The community of Pleasant Valley condominiums, though scarred by the experience, emerged stronger, more vigilant, and deeply committed to fostering an environment of genuine respect, compassion, and accountability. New leadership was elected to the HOA with transparent financial practices and resident-focused policies implemented to ensure such an abuse of power could never happen again. Clara Johnson, with the unwavering support of her son and her newly re-energized community, slowly recovered from her ordeal, her gentle spirit, though bruised, ultimately unbroken. Her new bathroom door became a symbol not of her past trauma, but of her resilience and the community's collective repudiation of cruelty and injustice. Mike Johnson, his dual role as devoted son and dedicated public servant now fully appreciated by his mother's neighbors, continued his vital work with the Emergency Plumbing and Sanitary Code Enforcement Division. His actions having not only protected his own mother, but also liberated an entire community from a hidden, insidious tyranny. The acrid smell of cement eventually faded from the hallways of Pleasant Valley, replaced by the much sweeter, more enduring aroma of newfound peace, mutual respect, and a hard-won, deeply cherished sense of true community.